Hi, welcome to my slideshow. This is called Gay in School is Cool, and it's meant to be for posterity's sake, as well as maybe being available for any high school health class or group of teachers that might be interested in the topic of homosexuality being taught in the public schools. I teach reading, writing, math, science right now at a high school in the East Bay. I teach special education. I've been teaching for 26 years. I've taught many grades. I've taught third grade for 3 years, sixth grade for 9 years, special education for 9 years. I was a reading teacher for 4 years. So I have lots of experience teaching in California. I have 3 children. These are their made-up names. I don't have their permission to use their names, so I just use pseudonyms. Mark, Renee, and Jean, those are their ages. I was married to a woman for 18 years. We're, for the most part, genial and friendly to each other. We're co-raising our children. We were married for 18 years. I'm now married to a man. We've been married 1.5 years. I was what some would call ex-gay for many years, from 1985 to 2008. And I actually read this book right here, Steps Out of Homosexuality, and would study that with other men who were calling themselves ex-gay. I actually studied with this gentleman here who's in the picture. He was a young man when I was a young man in the 1980s, and we would go to Bible studies and ex-gay support groups in the 1980s. 2 of my children are very evangelical, and one is rather agnostic like myself. But the 2 that are very evangelical, even though we don't always agree on how I live my lifestyle, we have agreed to disagree, and we love each other and find other things to talk about. So I actually had a 6th grade student come out to me one time and said, "Excuse me, may I ask you a question?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I have the same problem you have." I said, "Well, I'm not sure if I see that as a problem, but I understand what you're saying." She asked, "May I ask you a question?" I said, "Yes." She said, "My parents and I don't always agree. What should I do?" Well, I had her in my family life sex education classes, so I had the parent permissions to talk with her about things, so I wasn't worried about that. But I said, "Well, my children and I don't always agree, and we just find other things to talk about." Here's some pictures of myself. This is me on the left. And right here, that's near the aquatic park in San Francisco. I was actually baptized there in the 1980s by the Foursquare Church in San Francisco. My second baptism, I was also baptized several years earlier by the Niles near Fremont Foursquare pastor. But this is where I swim occasionally. Not a lot, but occasionally I'll go out here and swim back and forth. This is my husband, very sweet human being. Here's a friend of mine. I won't say his name because I don't have his permission to use his name, but we have our kayaks here, and I have a couple other kayaks, and we went kayaking around Alcatraz Island on this day. We were piloting for a swim club. And then here on my right, I was actually with my son and daughter-in-law in England watching a play. We saw Annie. My son and daughter-in-law are currently in the Ukraine doing missions work, but they took a break and met me in England when I was there traveling in Europe. for the summer. Here's some old school pictures. Myself right here, graduation picture. Here's me here on the top, blonde hair, with my ex-girlfriend who I actually came out to in high school. She's on my Facebook today. We are in good terms. At the time, her reaction was to write a letter and out me to my mom. My mom's reaction was just don't talk about it. Don't tell your dad. Underneath that, picture of me with black hair. I did not leave my hair alone in high school. Receiving an award. I was the homecoming king at our high school. Here on the very right is homecoming king picture. Down here on the bottom right, it's me in 7th grade. Very tall in 7th grade. And I had a girlfriend then. Very sweet young lady whose sister is on my Facebook today. But as you could tell, I was trying to be like the other guys in having girlfriends, but it just wasn't working. And then my junior year here at the top, when I finally realized that I was gay. Here's some more high school pictures. Football glory. On the left, me and my friend, another linebacker. And in the middle, newspaper article. And on the right, we were playing with our hair, cut our hair. I think my haircut then manifested my confusion and my frustration with what was going on with me in high school, struggling with homosexuality. I was also very religious. So it was a difficult time trying to resolve the conflict between homosexuality and my religious beliefs. And one outlet I found was to cut my hair. Here's one of the reasons why homosexuality should be taught in schools, health classes like this. Health Standard 110 is students recognize that there are individual differences in growth, development, physical appearance, gender roles, and sexual orientation. There's another standard that promotes homosexuality being taught in schools. So as a practice, students should practice respect for individual differences and diverse backgrounds. Students will eventually work with LGBT people, and they are currently sitting beside them in schools. The school where I work at, unfortunately, I hear the word faggot quite a bit being thrown around the hallways. And I've heard there is some other problems with respect and harassment toward others who are LGBT. I asked a counselor a couple of years ago from another school if she saw harassment, and she said yes, 2 of her counselees were LGBT and were afraid to come out of the closet in fear for their safety. And then I also met a high school student that year, a couple of years ago, who said he was LGBT and he was thinking of suicide and was afraid to go to the gay support groups for fear that his peers would tease him. Here's a picture that I took in Modesto years ago when I went to the Modesto High Day of Respect. This is the day where they invite minority leaders to come in and share about their challenges of being a minority and sometimes their obstacles or the discrimination that they face. I had gone to this probably about 6 years in a row, and each year spoke to approximately 5 classrooms. Unfortunately, last year I voiced complaints regarding the district not following a couple LGBT-friendly laws, and coincidentally, they did not invite me back to the Day of Respect, which I thought was interesting. I wasn't invited this year either. And I lost my train of thought. Spoken there, made a complaint to the district. Oh, and the principal there at Modesto High last year threw out some pro-gay literature that was meant for students. It was literature inviting students to a diversity dance and the stack of literature was put on his desk, and he admitted throwing it away. So I just thought the two was a little red flaggish, that him throwing away literature, and then also the LGBT, myself and a couple of my LGBT friends were not invited to the Day of Respect the same year that I was trying to stand up for LGBT rights by complaining and voicing my concerns with the school district, administrators, and the Board of Education. So here's another reason why it's important to talk about homosexual issues in school. This is literature from the 1950s, and as you notice, everyone is white. Their literature, Reader's Digest from the 1970s, and again, almost everyone in here is white. I couldn't find a picture I'd seen earlier of Jesus and angels. Of course, they were all white as well. Santa Claus is white, comics are white, advertising. And then compare that to today. Now, this is from today. Highlights, you can tell in this picture, there's lots of diversity. People have different colored skins. So my point is that sometime in our history, we recognize that not all people are white in our schools, and we need to recognize that in our curriculum. Unfortunately, we haven't recognized that not all of our children are heterosexual, and to represent them in the literature. So here's one issue. I brought this to my school board one year. I said, here on the upper left, we have Dr. Seuss and A.A. Milne. I think I'm pronouncing his name right. And I had books when I taught sixth grade on them and their lives. And each book talked about their romances and their life choice partners. And then down here you have two openly gay authors, Tommy de Paula and Maurice Sendak, who are very open about their homosexuality, how their homosexuality influenced their literature, like Oliver Button and Sissy. They have gay partners, and yet the literature I had on them, to the students, presented them as asexual. Now that subtly presents a message to students that heterosexuality is healthy and good, and homosexuality is something we don't speak about. And that just like that literature where everyone's white is outdated, that should be an outdated concept because not all of our children are heterosexual. So I made that point last year with some of my administrators, and they came back with a question: how do you know that all your students, that some of your students, how do you know that some of your students are homosexual? And besides some of them actually coming out at times, my question to my administrators was, how do you know that all students are heterosexual? You don't. You don't know. I had a family member recently come out as homosexual, a young lady who's in her 20s, and I had no idea. This person I've known in my family for 20-something years, always saw this person as heterosexual. She came out and said, I'm homosexual. And I asked her, how long have you known? She said she's known since she was in 9th grade. So in 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, 4 years of high school, she was in the closet, felt insecure, felt bad about who she is, and none of her teachers knew. And that's the way it is with most of LGBT students. They are able to hide in the closet. When speaking at the Day of Respect one year, I've heard African American speakers share that one of the things they resent about homosexual people, comparing the homosexual struggle with the African American civil rights struggle, is, and this is their words, they say homosexual people can hide. They can hide their minority status, whereas African American people cannot hide, and therefore it's not the same. And I realize it's not the same, and there's certain aspects of the African American civil rights movement that I'm sure have been very much more difficult than the civil rights of homosexual people. But at the time, I wanted to say in response that yes, we're not always equal in our struggles, because at the time they could go out and get married in California and I could not. So, and even today, the Department of Justice recognizes race as a discriminatory factor in fighting for justices for people, but they don't recognize homosexuality. So it's not all the same. And I'm not saying it's harder for gays, but there are differences. But my point is that just like those African American speakers said, homosexuality is something you can hide. So we don't know who's gay in the classroom, but we do know from research and census that are taken that at least 5% of our population in our classrooms are LGBT. And that would be 1 or 2, possibly 3 in every class of 30. So here's a new law, by the way, that's meant to even out the scale toward a more equitable classroom for LGBT youth, those who are or will identify as LGBT. Senate Bill 48, Fair Education Act, January 2012. California teachers shall highlight positive contributions of the Department of Education in California piggybacked on that and came out with direction for teachers. And here's one of their documents. The framework, chapter 20, says, current evidence indicates that groups of students experience unsafe conditions and rejection in schools because of their sexual orientation. It also says teachers can fill gaps found in the curriculum by adding relevant examples of diversity beyond those in the standards. Now, a lot of teachers are waiting for standards to come out. They're waiting for literature to be given to them. But this says we can go beyond the standards. We don't have to wait. And down to the lower right, it says important for students to see examples of members from their own sexual orientation. It's another page from the California History Framework. It says all of California's children and adolescents have a fundamental right to be respected and to feel safe in school. Yet many do not because of their sexual orientation or gender expression. Kids who are in grades K through 6, who are gender nonconforming, are less likely to feel safe and are more likely to stay home because they feel unsafe. They're often mocked or called names or bullied. Older kids, teens, 13 to 18, will report feeling unsafe or feeling harassed at school. So all California educators have a duty to protect students' right to physical and psychological safety at school. Education Code Section 200 also says prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity or gender expression. And that kind of act toward LGBT kids has a profound and prolonged adverse effect on students' ability to benefit from public education and maximize their potential. And again, I hear the word faggot quite a bit on my campus, and that it has profound and prolonged adverse effects on students' ability to have a healthy psychological demeanor. That's the right word. There's another page from the California Education Department. It says stigmatization based on sexual orientation or gender expression is related to lower academic achievement and educational aspirations, as well as poor psychological well-being. It says that LGBT kids, they understand the negative effects of the slang terms of discriminatory language. But we should understand the negative effects. The teacher should, and the students. And it's not a healthy effect. Teachers will increase students' access to an inclusive curriculum, and they will make available and share age-appropriate literature that reflects the diversity of humankind. Center for Disease Control agrees with the Department of Education's findings. They say that LGBT teens are 4 times as likely to commit or attempt suicide. They're more likely to experience physical violence or depression, to be homeless, to engage in drug use, to have high dropout rates, high absenteeism, and experience harassment at school due to negative stigmatization. Here's another LGBT-friendly law in California. It's Assembly Bill 329. Became effective in January 2016. It says California Healthy Youth Act Does not require sex ed in California schools. However, if a local education association, in other words, school district, chooses to do so, then they must adhere to Assembly Bill 329. So I know in my district last year, I complained that they were not, they were teaching sex ed, but they were not adhering to the law. The ACLU sent them a letter. The Department of Education also sent them an explanation that they were required to adhere to the law. In response, they sent me a letter saying their school board had decided not to teach sex education, which I find amazing that they would choose to not teach sex education as opposed to teaching sex education and being inclusive. I had spoken at a school board meeting sharing a story of how in the South, this was a story a parent had shared with my students, a grandparent had come and shared with my students one year, saying he had lived in the Midwest, actually, I think it was Tennessee, where the city organizers and leaders were told by the federal government, or it might have been the state government, either one, that they had to make their swimming pool diverse. They had to include everyone. They couldn't tell the African American people they could not swim. And the city leaders chose to, instead of desegregating the pool, they just chose to bury the pool and turn it into a tennis court. My former employer, I think they did the same thing with sex education. Instead of making it diverse, they would just rather just having all the students in lower grades be ignorant of human nature. Sad, bad choice. Here's the reason why we need the non-traditional gender curriculum and the LGBT curriculum. Now, here's a student, Ronan Shimizu. He unfortunately took his own life. Student Rancho, I think it was Rancho Cordova School District near Sacramento. He was teased for being the only male cheerleader, for designing his own clothes, and was bullied. His parents took him out of school, and he took his own life. So if that school district would have taught positive contributions of LGBT people, like maybe Karl Otto Lagerfeld, gay fashion designer, or that it's okay to have non-gender conforming behavior, like being a cheerleader when you're a guy, like James Stewart and former President Bush, George Bush, maybe he would might still be here today. There's another tragic story. A wonderful young lady, Denisha Neal, who was in high school in Modesto, participated in traditional male sports, football and wrestling. She was teased and harassed by young people. There was accusations that she had said to one that she wanted to massage the girl's feet, which to me sounds like normal human nature, normal flirting. And for someone, I don't know Denisha Neal if she was lesbian or not, but if she was, that would be normal behavior. I mean, if it were a guy turning to a girl saying, I'd like to massage your feet, no one would think twice that was inappropriate. But someone had accused her of that and made a big deal of it, and there was a supposed confrontation. I don't know if it was verbal or what it was, but she was threatened to be expelled and was worried about that and took her own life. But I can't help but wondering if that school district would have taught that it's okay to have non-gender conforming behavior and respect for those who exhibit LGBT, express LGBT behavior or mannerisms, that we respect everyone. Maybe that would not have happened. Maybe this student would still be here today. Tragic, tragic. So Senate Bill 48 would allow teachers, or were already allowed, but would encourage teachers to teach about people like Bayard Rustin. Here's a gay and civil rights leader, worked alongside Martin Luther King. He was extorted to step down, threatened jealous leaders, threatened to put out rumors that the Bayard Rustin, who is gay, was having a relationship with Martin Luther King, which I don't believe was true, if he did not step down. So he did step down, and then before the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, he was asked to rejoin the movement. He did, and he was made the primary organizer for that march. But I don't remember hearing about Bayard Rustin growing up. And I think LGBT kids would sit higher up in their seats, their self-esteem's raised, harassment deterred if we were to teach people like this. Here's Oscar Wilde. He wrote a lot of literature, Dorian Gray, The Importance of Being Earnest. He was in prison for 2 years for hard labor for being in a homosexual relationship. And his literature was used as evidence against him to put him in prison. I spoke at a high school one year, and this one class, must have been a literature class, had a huge poster of Oscar Wilde, and I asked students, did you know he was gay? And nobody knew he was gay. How can you teach about Oscar Wilde and the fact that his literature was used to put him in prison without mentioning that he was homosexual? Again, Senate Bill 48, Fair Education Act, would encourage teachers to include these kinds of aspects. So here's Alan Turing. He was a mathematician, a computer scientist, really a hero. He saved many Americans and English officers by breaking Nazi codes during World War II. He was caught in a homosexual relationship and was given an ultimatum to either go to prison or do hormone therapy, where he would have to take estrogen. He chose the hormone therapy and then subsequently took his own life. There was a movie made about him with Benedict Cumberbatch and Keira Knightley. I'm not sure if I said the actor's name right. But this guy should be held as a hero, and he should be taught in our math classes. And instead, his fate was to take his own life because he was treated unfairly for expressing his human nature. Here are other people who are either homosexual or thought to be homosexual in our history. Alexander the Great, Roman Emperor Hadrian, Gertrude Stein, the German and Jewish gay men who were imprisoned by the Nazis in the 1930s, who often had the worst work details. Most did not survive. Those that did were not given back their reparations since they were considered criminals after the war. Possibly Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, William Shakespeare was thought of being bisexual. James I, King of England, General William von Steuben, who fought in the War of Independence. I think he was from Prussia. Walt Whitman, Peter Doyle, lots of other people. James Buchanan, one of our presidents. William Rufus King, Langston Hughes, Tennessee Williams, Marlene Dietrich, and many, many others that history teachers should at least consider whether or not they were homosexual, and should, in my opinion, mention that to their students. They can say so-and-so was thought to be homosexual. Who kills a mayor and a supervisor and goes to jail only for 5 years? That, in my opinion, was a reward by that jury. They rewarded Dan White. In one sense, they said, thank you for killing the gay politician. Just unbelievable. Just unbelievable that happened in our history. And that should be mentioned in our classrooms. Here's some more gay politicians. Here's Mike Pence, our vice president, with the Prime Minister of Ireland, Leo Rodkar, and his partner here, Matt, I don't know his last name. Here in the middle is one of our first gay governors, Governor of Colorado, Jared Polis. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name correctly. And then here on the right is a mayor in Indiana. He's one of our presidential candidates for 2020. Some more gay politicians. Barney Frank has been out of the closet for a long time. Most of these were or are in the House of Representatives. Tammy Baldwin's an out lesbian. She is one of our senators in the Senate. And then all these other gentlemen here are, I believe, currently in the House of Representatives, except for this gentleman here. He was in the House between 73 and 97. But lots of gay politicians. There are many, many more that are in Congress now. Here's another reason for having homosexuality in the schools is that we live in a democracy and students are our future voters. So just for example, on the subject of gay marriage, which like a seesaw went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, whether or not gay people can get married. And finally, the Supreme Court said, based on the 14th Amendment, which came after the Civil War, which says one group of people, even though they're a majority, and then after the Civil War it was whites, cannot take away another group's rights, and after the Civil War it was blacks. Well, in the case of marriage, Supreme Court basically said that one group of people, even though they're the majority, conservative religious people, cannot take away another group's, even though they're a minority, this would be LGBT's rights to get married. I'm married. I love being married. Sometimes I hear people act like don't understand why gay people are bothered by people trying to take away gay marriage or trying to take away the right to adopt. And I think, well, how would you feel if someone was trying to dissolve your marriage or take away your children? I think that you would feel a little resentful. So here's a myth about homosexuality. These come from the Handbook of Clinical Sexuality by Stephen Levine. These are all myths. Being gay or lesbian is a choice. That's a myth. Homosexuality is an illness. It's a sin. Those are myths. All gay are effeminate. Lesbian women are masculine. That's a myth. Homosexuals prefer to be the opposite sex. That's a myth. Homosexuals are out to recruit young people to become homosexual. That's a myth. Homosexual people are pedophiles. That's a myth. Homosexuality is caused by dominant mothers and passive or absent fathers. That's a myth. All bisexuals are really homosexuals who are not yet willing to identify as homosexuals. That's a myth. And all gay men are only interested in sex and are unable to sustain long-term relationship. Also a myth. They're all myths. Just want to look at them for a second. Homosexuality is illness. The American Association, the APA, American Psychological Association, in 73 and 70, forget the year, 2 years that they took the homosexuality out of the Diagnostic Manual, DSM-5, Diagnostic and Statistics Manual of Mental Illnesses. Being gay is sin. Religion is personal. Even the Christian Bible says, do not judge and choose for yourself. It says each person must work out his or her own salvation. So even in the Christian religion is a personal issue between oneself and one's God, or not God if they choose to be atheist or agnostic. How can you tell if people are homosexual? Do they look effeminate? No, that's the myth. Do they wear certain clothing, the right earrings on the right, left? No, that's silly. Do they wear certain colors? No. I know a lot of heterosexual men who wear pink. Do they look at their nails or the shoes in certain ways? Just silly folklore. Here's some people that are gay and out of the closet. Jim Parsons, Big Bang Theory. Alan Cummings from Spy Kids and other movies and books, X-Men Nightcrawler. Anderson Cooper, who's actually at a bar I was at in New York City a few years ago called Eastern Bloc. I believe his partner co-owns that with two other gay men. Ellen DeGeneres. Freddie Mercury. I heard someone said that they were not happy that the actor who played Freddie Mercury on the Queen movie that came out recently had mentioned that he was gay. I'm sorry to say he is gay or was gay. Glee actors Jane Lynch and Chris Colfer. Greg Louganis, Olympic diver, hitting his head on the board. He wrote a book about his experience coming out of the closet. I actually read it and emailed him because I could relate to some of the things he shared. And he was nice enough to write me a little note saying, hang in there and namaste. Seems like a really good guy. Ian McKellen, English actor. Lots of movies people are familiar with. X-Men, Lord of the Rings. Homosexual. Jodie Foster, one of my favorite actors when I was a kid and now. Alyssa Etheridge, singer, lesbian and out. Neil Patrick Harris, When I Met Your Mother, host of the Academy Awards. He is with his family. Raven Simone, lesbian. I actually saw her in New York. She was in Sister Act on Broadway. Ricky Martin, looking good. Ellen Page, saw her on the talk show the other night. I think she's playing Kitty Pryde here in X-Men. Mike and Mel White. So Mel White on the left, they're both homosexual, father and son. Mel White was a ghostwriter for many religious people like Billy Graham, Oliver North. And then he also wrote a book called Stranger at the Gate. And I met him, and I was at his son's house. I didn't meet his son, but they threw a party for the End of the Amazing Race season, and then also for fundraising, the sponsors who fundraised and sponsored Mel White's, the dad's ministry called Soul Force, and the gentleman I was dating was a contributor to that, so he was invited, and we went down to Santa Monica, and it was very thrilling, and it was nice to meet Mike White. I had no idea his son was an actor or comedian till we were on our way. Nice people and gay. Robin Roberts, ABC News. There she is, I think, fighting cancer on the left. She's lesbian. Tim Cook, a.k.a. Tim Apple, according to our president, CEO of Apple Corporation. Lance Bass came out. Here's some gay sports figures. We have Billy Bean, Dave Coupe. I wish I had heard about him when I was a kid. Jason Collins, Michael Sams, Robbie Rogers, soccer player, Orlando Cruz, professional boxer, and Sarah, I can't pronounce his last name, professional football. More professional gay athletes, Adam Rippon and John Amici, basketball. So here's the point I would like to talk about. Homosexuality is not a choice. Here's one of the myths. So there are lots of things you can choose. You can choose the food you eat, your cell phone that you use, your internet provider, your friends, the books you read, whether or not to attend college, what job to apply for, whether or not to go to church, whether or not to be religious, to go out on a Friday night or stay in, but not homosexuality. So this is one of the myths people have about homosexuality. Homosexuality is not chosen. A lot of people seem to think that it is, and I get that reaction from a lot of people that they think it's something you can choose. And more than that, they act as if it's something that I can choose and that I've chosen the wrong thing, which is very frustrating because it's not something that I choose. So you can't choose the feelings or the attraction or the emotional bonding with your same sex. It is true. People will say, well, you can choose to abstain. You can choose to not act out on the behavior. That doesn't change the feelings. I always equate that with being a nun or a priest. And actually, I did that. I think I shared that earlier. I was ex-gay between 85 and 2008, but it doesn't change the feelings. And for me, it didn't work. And today I have many friends who were once ex-gay and who are now living openly as a homosexual. They didn't find satisfaction in trying to abstain from homosexuality. I do have to say I do have a couple of people who are still ex-gay, and that is their journey and their route and their choice. For me, it was not a satisfying journey. Some people argue you can choose to abstain. I just want to make the point whose choice it is. Is it to abstain? For example, here's something from the Christian Bible. It talks about how being married is okay, but being single is even better. But for someone to choose that for someone else is not practical. I mean, that's those kind of choices you have to make on your own. I have no more the right to tell someone you should be single and abstain from marriage as much as they would have the right to say to me, look, I have a certain belief, and then you have to adhere to my belief. For the most part, regarding schools and religion, I would think that it's best, my opinion, that we adhere to separation of church and state. Because whose religion are we going to propagate? I mean, mine, yours, somebody else's. So it's best just to keep them separate. And here's all these people who agree, separation of church and state. And when schools try to propagate a religious belief, say, well, we're not going to teach diversity because it offends administrators, teachers, or even parents, certain parents, Christian beliefs, that is violating the rights of parents and students who choose to not be religious or who choose not to be conservative. So it's best just to keep things neutral. Belief system here as a teacher, schools should not be used to propagate an agenda, religious or non-religious. Schools should be a place of neutrality where a spectrum of views are presented and children and youth are taught how to think critically and how to analyze and critique facts and differentiate them from opinions in order to make healthy life choices for themselves. At schools, we teach religions, but we don't practice religion. And that's true. I was reading Psalms the other day. We were interpreting songs and using them to talk about figurative language. We were using Psalm 23. So but we don't practice religion. We teach diversity and respect for all, but we do not force people to think one way over another. Teachers do not try to take away or change a child's center or their beliefs. School is not a place where teachers, gay, straight, religious, non-religious, are trying to proselytize. That's just fine. Here's a point I'd like to make. This woman, Carol Lynn Pearson, wrote this book, No More Goodbyes, and she talks about the disproportionate number of Latter-day Saint young men who are committing suicide because the church, the Latter-day Saint church, is having a difficult time accepting these young men as they are, and they're trying to change them or pressure them to change when you can't change human nature. So here down at the bottom, the dangers of not accepting homosexuals for who they are is that people will self-harm. They will have self-hatred, suicide attempts, suicide, lowered self-esteem. Consider this. How would you feel if your children turned their backs on you? Don't underestimate the trauma of withholding love can create. So I had a class at a junior college for parents whose children had divorced them. And I went to this class, it was a night class, And there were about 15, mostly women, whose children had just turned their backs on them. And it was amazing how traumatized these parents were, even though they had children that were accepting them and were not turning their back. But these women were traumatized that one child in their lives would just turn their backs and walk away. And I wanted to say, this is how gay young people feel when they have one, and some of them have both. A lot of LGBT kids have both parents turn their backs on them because of their human nature, because of they think it's a choice, but it's not a choice, because homosexuality is manifesting in their lives. And what I think a lot of parents are trying to do, religious parents are trying to shun their kids because they think, well, if I shun them, then they will hurt so much they'll realize that their life is wrong, and they will turn away from homosexuality and do what they think is the right way. But you can't turn off human nature. And what happens a lot of times is children are killing themselves. So please do not turn your backs on your children. So what is homosexuality? If it is not a choice, what is it? So I'd like to talk about what it is for a few minutes. So homosexuality is not a choice. It is three things that I'm going to highlight here. One is homosexuality is natural variation. So if you have 100 babies in China, another 100 in Japan, another in Russia, Mexico, etc., and statistics show about 5-7% of our population is homosexual. So out of those 100 babies, we know at least 5%, around 5, will later identify as homosexual. So it's not a choice, it's just part of natural variation. And similarly, out of the 100, you always know there's a certain percentage will later identify as left-handed. Certain percentage will be twins. These are just natural variations of our human existence. I was talking to one of the presenters at the Day of Respect at Modesto High School, and this person was from China. And I said, is it true in China people will look down on people if they're left-handed? She said that is true. And when she was in elementary school in China, the teachers would swat children's hands with a ruler if they were to try to use their left hand. There was this negative stigma for children who are different. Not that there's anything morally wrong with using your left hand, but in China, they didn't like for people to be different. And I think that's what similarly goes on here in the United States with homosexuality. People just don't like people who are different. And they might not have a ruler, but they have other things. They have words, or they have looks, or they have other ways of communicating, not talking, shunning. Here's the second thing homosexuality is. If it's not a choice, it's a physiological response. So if I'm on a bench in Santa Monica and maybe Jennifer Lopez and Ricky Martin's limousines break down, we're all waiting for a bus. Well, if I were to look to my right and I see Jennifer Lopez, my heart would go bum, 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 bum. Then if I were to look to my left and I would see Ricky Martin there, my heart rate would go bum, 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 bum. And then when I realized it was Ricky Martin, it would probably go bum, 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 boo. Now that is a physiological response. That is not something I'm choosing. And that's what homosexual people are experiencing. They're, especially adolescents, it's like they don't know what's going on. It's just, it's a physiological response. Their heart rate, their adrenaline, their hormones just all kick in, and it's not fair to punish people or judge people for something they haven't chosen. So it's a natural variation, and it is a physiological response. And then the third thing is it's discovered. So young people will experience feeling different. And usually they don't have a name for it at first. They just know I'm not like the other kids. Often it's non-traditional gender behavior. A lot of times there's name calling, being called a tomboy, or asked, why do you dress that way? If a girl's dressing like a boy, in more masculine clothes, or called a sissy, or a faggot, or for the boys. There's whispers about so-and-so is gay, or there's questions in the family. Um, for me, it was like, well, I didn't like sports when I was a kid, except for football. I did play football, but I didn't at family gatherings. I didn't want to hang out with the guys that were playing cards or playing football outside. I wanted to, I was found myself in the kitchen with my aunts a lot. It's just there was something different, and it seemed like there was like this big heterosexual party that I just was not invited to, especially during adolescence. My friends would talk about sports, and I just wasn't into talking about sports, or they would talk about girls, and I just couldn't relate. Or I would have a girlfriend and physically it wouldn't work. And then she would go on and go out with one of my friends, and then he would brag about doing physical things with the girl. And I was discovering I wasn't like them. So in third grade, I knew I had a crush on one of my classmates. In sixth grade, same thing. I had a crush on one of my classmates, and he was trying to uh, do physical things with girls, and I just was goo goo over him, and I just wanted to follow him around. And so I was discovering in ninth grade, a classmate put his arm around me, and again, this flush of hormones and something that just felt so physically affirming. It's like, what is this? I just wanted more of it. Um, and actually, in high school, so when those things happen in high school, it really should be a positive experience. It should be a time of first date, a first kiss, first dance, first romance. But for me and a lot of LGBT kids, it's really a time of confusion, time of OMG. For me, it was, oh my God, I'm realizing I'm one of those things my uh, football mates called faggot in the locker room, and I was confused. I was depressed. In high school, very religious, and then all of a sudden I had these feelings, homosexuality. I was just thought God would spit me out of His mouth. I'm going to go to hell. I thought if I try to express my homosexuality, my friends were expressing their sexuality. They were asking girls out on dates. They were kissing girls. They were, doing things with girls. And I felt very guilty if I wanted to express my human nature. So this is just a slide on today versus then. All of those people, a lot of those slides coming out. Today we have clubs like Gay Street Alliances where kids can get support. And then back when I was a kid, we didn't have those. This is what we had. We had Jim Nabors was thought to be gay. Liberace was thought to be gay. Rock Hudson, all these actors here and musicians. There were rumors that they were gay. I think Billie Jean King had come out of the closet. Of course, seems like women often are a little more brave than men. At the high school where I work now, it seems like women are more, the ladies are more prone to walk around. The lesbian young ladies are more prone to walk around holding hands, but I don't see any of the guys holding hands, although I've seen some of the guys wearing makeup, so I guess maybe they are brave. But my point is here, we didn't have a lot of support then, and it was very difficult for me to come. And LGBT, you discover it, and you discover it at a time that's challenging. So adolescence is already challenging. You have hormones racing, your brain is changing, you're becoming more independent, you're pulling away from your parents, you're choosing your value system, you're forming your self-identity, and you go, oh my gosh. Again, I think I already shared this. I talked to some counselors, said, is it true LGBT kids? And they said yes, that their experience is that kids are having a hard time dealing with coming out. Often, not all. And back to my experience, I had outed myself to my girlfriend, and she had shared with my mom. My mom says, just don't talk about it. My clergy had approached me and said, I know you're struggling with something. They didn't want to mention it. I didn't know how to mention it. My friends, so a couple of them came around and said, hey, I heard you're gay. I heard rumors. That was so comforting. But a lot just didn't want to talk about it or just avoided me. They didn't know what to say. So it was very isolating. And the view from what I thought the church was saying was you're going to go to hell. So anyway, I was very saddened. I was very depressed. There was a time when I was considered suicide. There was one time where I actually attempted suicide. I'd taken some pills. I remember carrying a stack of books about suicide around at my high school, hoping my counselor would see it. hoping, someone would rescue me. Today, I know what to do if I'm sad. Hey, if you're sad, you find someone to talk to. Back then, that was my coping. Could have stack of books about suicide. I remember a friend of mine in high school when I was a senior said, I'm moving to San Francisco. I said, well, you're moving to San Francisco. It's your senior year. He said, well, my parents are kicking me out. They said, if you're going to be gay, we're going to kick you out. And I thought, if you're going to be gay, how can you not be gay if you are gay? I mean, that's this message. You don't choose it. How can you be something? You can pretend not to be gay. So back to my high school years, I was depressed. I think that was my sophomore year. My junior year, I said, this isn't working. I chucked my religion. I came out with my friends. Things were okay for a while. I'm just going to go to the next. So here's society's historical response. And I think I talked about some of these myths here. That we're sinners, we're not. Homosexuals or perverts, we're not. We're criminals, we're not. We're mentally ill, we're not. So here's my main message. If you're LGBT, let yourself off the hook. It's not something you've chosen. If your friends are LGBT, let them off the hook. It's not something they've chosen. If you have kids later LGBT, let them off the hook. If you have coworkers or classmates, LTO, TH, let them off the hook. Here's one of my favorite quotes. The only perverse thing about homosexuality is society's insane inability to accept human nature. 3 short stories. So the first one is I was in a psychiatrist's office with a family member who was having some mental health issues. And the psychiatrist turned to me and some other family members and said, has there been any trauma in this person's life? And someone in the office turned to me and pointed at me and said, well, he's homosexual. And the psychiatrist said, well, what does that have to do with anything? He's just being who he is. How can he be anything else? Which is true. And then with further discussion, it came out, what I thought, was that this person's surroundings, this person's school and their church, and those institutions' inability to accept human nature is maybe what put pressure on this person. Again, it's just human nature. Another story on Facebook, my grandfather's brother, can't believe he's still alive, after the Supreme Court passed gay marriage, posted, he said, today, this was his response, so today Satan has raised his flag post in the White House. That was a response to the Supreme Court passing gay marriage, saying that was Satan raising his flag post. And I responded, I said, really? So what do you tell your LGBT grandkids and great grandkids? Because I didn't have to ask. I know at least natural variation, at least 5% population. So he must have had. So he responded, or his wife responded, maybe his daughter. Someone in his family responded. They said, our heart aches for the suffering that they'll have to endure. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, the only suffering that we have to endure is from society's insane inability to accept human nature, from people like you who say when our rights are given by the government that it's Satan raising his flag post in the White House. Insane. In the last story, I was invited to a wedding, and it was going to be a conservative wedding, and I had a partner of 3 years who was also a family member to me, someone who had visited me in the hospital when I was in the hospital 3 years ago for about a week, and very few people visited me, but my boyfriend did because he was my family. And then after that, I got out, and then I was invited to this wedding, and someone was having a hard time deciding whether or not I could bring my boyfriend, and finally they said, yes, you can. And then in the interim, between the invitation and the wedding, they sent someone to me to talk to me about the wedding, and they came to me and said, the family sent me, and we want to just make sure there's not going to be any intimacy shown at the wedding. And I was kind of taken aback. I was like, what do you think? You think we're going to take the gift table and push all the gifts off the gift table and have a makeout session? I mean, it was just, they didn't want any hand holding or dancing or kissing or hugging between me and my life partner. And my point is, it's just insane. It's just human nature. I mean, it's just two people who care about each other expressing their intimacy toward each other. It's just the only thing about the only perverse thing about homosexuality. Anyway, that concludes my slideshow. Whew, thank you for listening. I'm sorry if you have any question and answers. I don't have a way to respond to you. My disclaimer, these are just my opinions. This is just my life, my journey. This is my journey. God bless you. And if you're LGBT, let yourself off the hook. If you're a parent, let your kids off the hook. If you're an educator, please consider these things. We really need to put the safety of kids first and respect all kids and their religious or non-religious beliefs. Thank you.